has it that St. James came to the Iberian Peninsula, which we now call Spain, in order to convert people to Christianity. And after several years of being there, he and some followers returned to Jerusalem. And when in Jerusalem, he was beheaded. So his followers brought his remains back to Spain and buried them in the northern part. Well, after a number of years, the spot where he was buried was forgotten until one night a hermit noticed a bright light shining down on a certain spot in a field. And upon investigation, he found the remains of St. James, and they were authenticated by the local bishop then. So a church was built over this spot, and a city grew around the church then, and the city is now called Santiago de Compostela. So eventually, people started to make pilgrimages to the church in order to give honor to St. James. And the route that is most famous is called El Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James. And the map you see up here is the route, and it shows you some of the largest cities that the route goes through. The traditional beginning of the route is actually in a little town called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is located in France. And if you follow the one line that kind of goes up and off to the left, Saint Jean is located on there. I don't know if you can read it or not, but that's where the route begins, and then it comes over the Pyrenees and into Spain. And the total amount in miles is 500 miles. For myself, I started in the city of Pamplona, which is the big dot, and the two lines diverge from each other. The big dot is Pamplona. So that's where I started, and that's about 450 miles from Santiago. This is St. James Matamoros, and there's another legend about St. James. At one point in time, the Moors and the Christians were battling each other for control of Spain. And the Moors were winning the battle, this one particular battle. And during the battle, St. James appeared then and helped the Christians overtake and win Spain and win the battle, actually. So many times you will see St. James depicted as St. James Matamoros or St. James the Moor Slayer. But most oftentimes you see him depicted as St. James the Pilgrim throughout the villages and cities. And there you will see him with his cape and his walking stick and a drinking gourd and his hat. And also, either on his cape or on his hat, you will see a scallop shell. And the pilgrims will wear these on their packs just to depict that they are a pilgrim walking the Camino. And the cross on it is called the St. James Cross. The route, as I said, starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, goes over the Pyrenees, and then it just kind of meanders throughout Spain. And it goes through the forest. And when I was walking through the forest and walking through the fog, it was kind of eerie feeling, but also just kind of enchanting feeling. So it was a pretty neat experience. And it goes through cities and along the highway too. But when you're walking along the highway, you have to be careful because the cars don't necessarily slow down for you. So you just have to watch for the cars because they don't watch for you, I found out. And it also goes through vineyards. And the trail or the road that you see here, the vineyard owners actually use it as well to get to their fields. So you'll have tractors and trucks also on the path with you. And it goes through the mountains. And I just the scenery from the mountains was just beautiful every time. It was just gorgeous. And it also goes through flatlands. And this particular area is called the Meseta. And it's very flat, and there's not a whole lot except for barley fields and wheat fields that the cereal companies use. They actually own the fields. So you get to see a lot of barley and oat and wheat, but it's still beautiful. One day it was quite breezy, and you could just see the wind blowing through the wheat fields, and it was just like water, the waves. So it was very pretty, actually. And it also can be quite rocky. So you just never knew what the trail was going to bring you that day. And you could start out on very flat and very easy, and then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, it would be very rocky and very hilly for you. So the terrain did vary throughout the day as well. My beginning with the Camino began about 15 years ago when I read a book called The Pilgrimage. And it's a fictional account of someone walking the Camino. And once I was done with the book, I knew that someday I had to walk this route. So a number of years went by, and I decided, okay, next summer I'm going to walk the Camino. So I'd start to investigate and look through books and look at websites and things, and next summer would come and I'd still be in Green Bay. So a few years would go by and I would do the whole process all over again. But about 2 years ago, I decided I wanted to do something special for my 50th birthday, and this is what I came up with. So I talked with Steve and the boys, and decided I'm going to go. I'm going to do it this time, and I did. So I did a lot of investigating of backpacks, what type would be best for me, what to look in a backpack, the type of clothes to wear, what would be best for that. I even investigated socks. I tried 3 different pairs out before I even went. But most important, I did a lot of investigating about the type of footwear. Do I want hiking boots, or do I want just regular walking shoes? And on the forum I joined, there was a mixture of opinions about that. But I did decide to go through to purchase some hiking boots. So it's not only the physical preparation that way, but it's also the mental preparation. And there were a number of times that I would say, I can't do this. I'm not going to go. And Steve would bring me back. Like, yes, you're going. I'm not letting you out of this. So there was that mental preparation too. And I just had to learn to see all of this as part of the journey as well. Even though I was here and I wasn't on the Camino, this was part of it too, to prepare myself both physically and mentally. But I knew that as I prepared here, there were some things that I would just have to learn when I got there. You can't learn everything by reading. You have to go out and experience it as well. And that's so much like life too for us. We can't learn everything. We just have to, we learn as life goes along for us. There are just some lessons that we have to learn as we go along. So how do you find the path? A gentleman by the name of Don Elias Valina San Pedro introduced the idea of marking the route with yellow arrows or a scallop shell. So all along the way you have to look for these yellow arrows or a scallop shell. And they could be on just about anything and everything that you can paint on, trust me. So this is actually one of the signs that's on the route, and it uses the scallop shell. And here it's painted on a post. And this is one of the scallop shells that is in a sidewalk in one of the cities. And this is a really nice big one, so they were easy to pick out as you walk. A lot of times in the sidewalks, they were just small ones. So you have a lot of people walking on the sidewalks too, and you have the traffic and you have the buildings, and so I had to really pay attention. I could not be distracted, especially at intersections. Those were probably the hardest to pick out the arrow or the scallop shell. But after a while, after a couple of days, your eyes and your mind just get accustomed to looking for them. So you kind of figure out where they might be. And this is one of the stone pillars that is used along the route too. These are probably used the most often. And the stones on top are left by pilgrims who walk by the pillar. And the custom is that by leaving a stone, you're leaving something behind that you don't want to carry any longer. And in fact, before the arrows were ever used, the stone cairns were used to mark the route. They would have big stone piles to help the pilgrims then find the route. And this is just another example. And this one is a post too, with the scallop shell on it. Spain is actually divided into provinces, and each province is responsible for their section of the Camino. So each province has a different way of marking the Camino as well. So as I'm looking for the arrows, I'm realizing that sometimes in our own lives we have our own markings that show us which way that we need to go and which path is best for us. And sometimes that marking may come through a book that we're reading. It may come through a conversation that we're having with someone or something we hear on the radio. But we do have our own markings, and it's up to us to pay attention to them and to follow them. And sometimes they do get covered up just because of the busyness of life, but that's when we have to stop and really discern and think, which way am I to go? Which way is my path? There were times when I would be walking along and I would realize that I haven't seen a yellow arrow for quite a while. So I would stop and I would look back behind me. Was there a crossroad that I missed or something? But I decided I just have to keep going. And so as I kept going, I'd get more nervous. But then all of a sudden a yellow arrow would show up for me. And that was so true all along the Camino. They would just show up just at the right time. And even people too, they would show up just at the right time. I remember one time I was in a small village and I was trying to find one of the hostels. And I couldn't find the arrow, and I was looking at my map in my guidebook and I just couldn't quite figure it out. And this was pretty early in the walk, so I wasn't quite seasoned yet. So I realized, well, if I just stand here with my book open, looking around, and sure enough, this little old lady comes up to me and she pats me in the arm, and with her little English and my little Spanish, I was able to communicate, what I was looking for, and she knew too what I was looking for. So she directed me in the right way, So those little things like that do happen, and it was pretty nice. But I had to learn to trust myself as I was walking as well. And I had to learn to trust that the arrows were going to show up at the right time. And I had to trust my instincts too, because sometimes that's all you had to go with. And where to stay? This was the question I think asked of me the most after I returned. Here in America, we call the places hostels, but in Spain, they are called albergues. And there are 4 different types of hostels that you can choose from, especially in the larger cities. One is a municipal hostel, and these are normally larger in size, and they are the least expensive, probably right around 6 to 7 euros. And then you have the private hostels, and these are smaller in size, and you can call ahead to reserve a bed, and they'll keep a bed for you until you arrive. But they're more expensive. They were generally 10 to 12 euros a night. And then you have the associations, and these are run by either by Spanish confraternities or national confraternities. And I know that the United States, some group here, they do operate one of the hostels along the route. And they are normally staffed by volunteers who are pilgrims who have already walked the Camino. And I liked those because you could get tidbits from the volunteers then, because they've already experienced it. And then the last type is a parish or a convent hostel. And these are normally attached to a church, and they would offer the pilgrim mass in the evening, and then a communal supper in the evening as well. And you could join that supper if you wanted to or not. And sometimes they would ask you to bring something for the meal. So you would have, maybe 10, 12 people bringing all different kinds of things, and you just shared it with each other. So when you get to a hostel, one of the first things you do is you make sure they have a bed left. Because if you don't, you have to go and find another hostel. So you check to see if they have a hostel or a bed, and if they do, you're in luck. So then you check in, and you pay your fee for the evening, and you also need what is called a pilgrim passport, and each hostel has their own unique stamp. So they will take your pilgrim passport and they will stamp it. And a number of the churches also have their own stamp, and some of the cafes along the route also have a stamp, their own stamp. So when I look back at my passport, I can say, oh, I stayed here and I remember this hostel, or I remember this meal at this one cafe. So it's just a neat way for me to go back and revisit my journey and what I did experience. So I have this up here if you want to look at it later. So you pay your fee, have your passport stamped. You have to leave your boots at the front door. You can't take them back in by the dorms. One, they want to keep the dirt out of the dorm area as much as possible, and 2, the smell. They don't want the smell of the shoes in the dorm area either. So you have to leave those behind. A number of times you could pick your bed that you wanted, but sometimes the beds were assigned to you as well. And if you're really early and really in luck, you get a bottom bunk. And those I found to be the easiest to get in and out of. Although there was one time when I did have the bottom bunk, and a young man in his early 20s, and he was just solidly built. Just a very nice gentleman, and I knew him from a couple of days ago. I visited with him, and he and his father were walking the route together. So I was at the hostel, I found my bed, got the bottom bunk bed, and eventually the son and his father came into the hostel, and the son takes the bunk above me. So I'm laying on my bed, resting, and I'm looking up, and the slats are taped. And so all I could do was just hope he didn't fall through, because there would have been nothing left of me. But so that was just kind of one of my funny stories. And this is actually one of the hostels that I did stay at. This was an association one, and the volunteer there was just very, very nice. And this is another hostel that I stayed at too. And the gentleman in the blue is Todd. And Todd and I walked quite often along the route. And he's from Utah. and I still keep in touch with him. We share emails back and forth quite often. This was a unique hostel in that it went around the church like a horseshoe. You couldn't get into the church at all. It was locked. And this hostel, the rooms were 2 beds to a room. And this is a picture of one of the doors. It's not a very good picture, but you just had your door and you had a bed on one side, bed on the other side, and that was it. But it was a place to sleep for the night. And this is another hostel that I stayed in. This one was in Hospital de Orbega, and I really, really enjoyed this one. It was set up as an art studio, and so they had an easel set up, and pilgrims could paint their story that they have already experienced on the route. And then the pictures were hung up throughout the hostel. So it was just amazing to see the pictures and the ideas and the feelings that the pilgrims had painted. And this is inside one of the hostels. This was like sleeping in a cave. It was pretty neat. But most of the beds are bunk beds, and this is another example. And the bunk beds can be very, very close together. So you don't know who's going to share your bunk above and who's going to be right next to you in your bunk either. So you went with the flow. That's all. There was one hostel that I stayed at, and they had 2 bunk beds in a room. And when I arrived at the room, I looked in, and there are 3 gentlemen. I was going to be the only female that evening in that room. But the 2 of the men were resting when I arrived, so I never really got to know them or visit with them at all. But the other gentleman, he was unpacking his pack when I arrived at the room. And he was just very, very nice, very pleasant, and we were able to converse some, and I felt very comfortable then. So that was an interesting experience. And these are the boots on the racks. Yes, I made sure that my boots were on the bottom rack, so I could find them in the morning. And if you had walking sticks too, you had to leave your walking stick at the door as well. And I would suggest walking sticks. This gentleman is going in April. Oh, I'm so excited for him. Just a little bit more about the hostels. Some of them did have kitchens, so you could cook a meal for yourself if you would like to. And I did that quite often, especially for supper. They always had a garden area where you could rest and relax and write in your journal if you would like to. They had a washing sink where you could wash out your clothes, and they always had clotheslines. And a lot of times they did have a washer and dryer, but they were in high demand. So I just stuck with the washing sink and washed my clothes out every day then. And the bathrooms, most times you did have a separate bathroom for the male and for the females, but sometimes they were co-ed. And you just had to be respectful of each other's privacy. In one of the hostels, we devised a plan where 2 males would go in at once, and then 2 females, and then 2 males. There wasn't a whole lot of privacy in the shower area. So you just worked it out. And like I said before, I really learned to go with the flow a lot. So I began my walk on June 17th, and it was a beautiful day. It could not have been a more perfect day to get going. I was very nervous. I was very excited and in disbelief that I was finally here, and I was finally walking the Camino. I established a routine for myself. I normally got up about 6 a.m. in the morning, and I would start walking by 6:30. And then I would stop along the way and rest and get something to eat and just continue that pattern for the day. And I tried to be done with walking at least by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. One, I didn't want to be out in the sun and the heat. And 2, I wanted to make sure that I gave myself plenty of time to rest in the afternoon as well, and to get my clothes washed and hung out and dried before the evening. And that would give me time also to do some grocery shopping for my supper meal. So I did try at least to be done with walking by 2 o'clock, and then in bed by 8. But the strange thing is, the sun, it doesn't go down until 10 p.m. So you still felt like you had to be outside, but I learned that I needed that rest as well. So my first day, my first stop was going to be the Hill of Forgiveness. And I was looking forward to this stop, and I wanted to spend some quiet, contemplative time at that area. And this is at the Hill of Forgiveness. And this is a wrought iron representation of the pilgrims, beginning from the medieval, going back all the way to the modern day pilgrim. But as I'm approaching the Hill of Forgiveness, a gentleman by the name of Jim Jones catches up with me, and he starts talking, and we start sharing information back and forth. And when we got to the top of the mountain, Jim kept talking. And so his friends had already arrived before him. So he went over by his friends and he talked with them. And he just had one of those voices that carried a lot, so you could hear it. Then he would come over by me and he would talk some more. So I really didn't get the quiet time that I was hoping to have. But I realized that I learned 2 very important lessons at the Hill of Forgiveness. 1, not to judge people, and 2, I had to let go of expectations for the day. So after spending a little bit of time there, I decided I'm going to leave. Jim just kept talking. But little did I know at that time what an important role Jim would come to have in my journey for me. So I'm walking away, and I also had that notion that I'm going to walk this Camino by myself. I'm not going to need any help. So I went on my way. But from then on, each day I had to remind myself I cannot judge people who are walking the Camino. We all walk the Camino differently, and we all have different reasons for being there. So some of the people would walk really long days, maybe 18 to 20 miles a day. Some people walked shorter days. Some people would have their pack bused to the next village for them, especially if they were having some type of health problems or blisters on their feet. And some of them would take a bus from village to village when they just got tired of walking. So everyone was walking differently, and that's so true for us here too. Each one of us is walking our path differently. We're walking life differently, and it's just so important to remember that and to not judge each other for the way we are walking our path. So at times, as you saw, the path could be very rocky, and one day Todd and I were up in the mountains, and the trail was very, very rocky, and it had big rocks, and it was very warm. It was about midday, and we were both getting pretty tired, and we needed a break. But we were walking to a village called Sable, but this path kept going down and winding back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth, and you could not see Sable. You know, sometimes when you're up in the mountains, you can look down in the valley and you see the village there. Well, this village was not showing up for us. And I would stop a couple of times and I'd say, Todd, are you sure we are on the right path? But we just kept going. And as I'm walking, I'm realizing, well, sometimes my life has been like that too for me. It just seems to keep going down and down and down, and it keeps going back and forth, and there just doesn't seem to an end to it. But you just have to hang on, and you just have to trust that the end will come at some point in time. And Sable did show up for us, finally, and so we were able to take a break. And sometimes that's what we need too when we get down to the end, to the bottom. We need that break, and we just need to take a rest then too. So we did have lunch. We were refreshed, and we pushed on then to the next village. But it was just so, what word do I want to use? So representative of life at times. But the ascents as well could be just as challenging too. Some of them were very steep as you went up into the mountain, and you could see the top of the mountain and the goal that you wanted to reach. You know, it's there, but I'm down here. I have to go all the way up yet. And sometimes, again, life is like that too. We are learning something new perhaps, or trying to incorporate something new in our life. And so we have this exhilaration, and we're going up, and we're working on it, and we're working towards that goal. And then finally, we can take that rest when we get to the top, and we can take a breather. And I think that gives that growth time to really take seed in us, and to really grow in our lives too. So, and on another day, I had to check my slides. Oh yeah, I forgot again. This is me at the Hill of Forgiveness. Jim took the picture of me here. And this is just a closer version, a close-up of it too. On another day, I was walking, and I looked off to my left, and I saw some people following a road to a village. And I thought, oh, you know, I'm going to get up here, and the path is going to veer left, and I'm going to follow this road, and I'm going to get to that village, and I can find something to eat them. But when I got to the point where the road did veer off, there was a yellow arrow pointing me ahead. So I stood there a bit. This was one of my first or second day, so I was kind of new yet too. So I got to follow the arrow. So I followed the arrow and went on, but it came to me that I cannot assume that I know which way the route is going to go, and I cannot follow other people either. I have to stick to my own path and what works best for me. So that was another very good lesson for me too, you know, to follow your path and what works best for you. Follow your instincts inside of you. You'll know if it's the right path for you or not. So as I said, my first day was a beautiful day, nice and sunny, and then I had 6 days of rain. And it was cold. It was in the 50s only too. But you have to walk. You can only stay one night in a hostel. So, and you have to be out by 8 a.m. the next morning. So you have to walk. And this is where that lesson of having no expectations came into play. I couldn't have any expectations for the day. I just had to accept it as it was. This is what I have. I have rain today. If I would have let myself get down about the rain, I would have been emotionally drained. And you can't have that when you're walking. So you just have to accept it and go on. However, about the 4th day, I was kind of bored with the rain, and I was kind of really bored with the mud. So as I'm walking around dodging the mud puddles, I thought, oh, you know, sometimes some people in our lives are like mud puddles. We just have to go around them. We can be respectful of them. We can support them. We can try and help them in some way. But there are times too when we have to step back from them as well. We can't get caught in their muck either. So that, I found that kind of humorous, and it just kind of helped me for the rest of the day. So it is important to take care of yourself as well. Another very important lesson for me as I walked was not to second guess the decisions that I made. I tend to be a should person. I should do this. I should have done this. and this drives Steve crazy, where I second guess my decisions that I make. But I had to stop doing that. Otherwise, I would have driven myself crazy. And I had to realize that the decision I made this day brought me to this experience on this day. And a good example of that is the day Todd were walking together, and we wanted to take the alternate route. Sometimes the path will follow along the highway, as you saw, because it's a little easier, and sometimes it's a more direct route from one village to the next village. But there are times when there is an alternate route, and we wanted to take this alternate route because it was more in the country, and it also offered the opportunity to walk on the Roman road. When the Romans occupied Spain about 200 BC, they built a road system from the northern part of Spain down to Rome. And that way they could transport mining materials down to Rome then. And some of the road is still there yet. And so I wanted to walk this. So we're walking, and we figured out how to get part of the way. And then the path veered off to the left, and it veered to the right, and there was no arrow. Honest, there was no arrow at all. So we're standing there wondering what to do. So we're talking about it a little bit, and then we looked over to the left, and we saw this farmer in his field, and he's waving us to the left. So Todd and I are looking at each other. Okay, we'll go to the left. So we did go to the left, but it brought us back to our original route along the highway. So then we stopped again, and we talked about, do we want to double back and go the other way? And we decided not to at that point in time. It would have just taken too much time to do that. So we continued on, and we ended up in a little village called Albergo Ranero. And it was a Sunday, and it happened to be a festival that day in that village. And this is so cool. And it was one of the neatest experiences that I had along the route. And just to see the people out in the village and talking and conversing. And they also had a big bubble machine. And this is a picture of it. And this was right next to our hostel. So this bubble machine was making all of these bubbles, and just tons of kids out there screaming and laughing and just having a great time. And it was just so wonderful to see. And then in the evening there was the singing and the dancing. So it was a nice experience. And not second guessing my decisions also came into play the day that I walked into the city of Burgos. I was very nervous before I left the States about walking into Burgos. So it's the largest city that you will walk through. It's 170,000 people. And I had read in a couple different places that the route is not well marked. And that is very true. It is not well marked. So you approach Burgos, and you have to walk around the airport, which takes a bit of time. And then you walk through an industrial part, and then you walk through suburbs, and you keep walking. And I could not find an arrow, and I did not have a pilgrim in front of me or behind me either. So I just had to trust. This is where that instinct and that trust came into play. So once I arrived inside the city of Burgos, I took out my guidebook and I looked at the map of the city that he has in there, and I picked out a couple of points that he marked in there. I thought, okay, if I can find this museum, then I can get myself to the hostel. But I couldn't find the museum. So I'm standing there, and it's late in the day, and I had run out of water, and I was really tired. So I thought, okay, I have to come up with plan B. So on the map, he has a street marked, and it looks like a main street. So I thought, okay, I have to get to this street, and then I can get to my hostel. So I walked, and I just started asking people, where is this street? And I would walk some more, stop someone else, where is this street? So I found the street finally, and I get to my hostel, and it's about 4:30 in the afternoon already. So I check in, and this hostel is a fairly large hostel. It has 160 people in it on 4 floors. So I check in, I'm on the 4th floor. Okay, so they had an elevator. Oh, hey, no steps. So I get to my floor and I look around. I don't recognize anyone. There's not a familiar face at all. And a number of times when you're at a hostel, you'll at least recognize someone from walking, but no one. So I clean up and I rest for a while. And I decided I'm not looking for a grocery store today. I can't do it. They did have a kitchen there, but I'm just going to go find a restaurant. So I did find a cafe in the plaza, and I sat down, and there's a gentleman at the table next to me, and I think he was from Norway, and so he struck up a conversation with me, and he's telling me he's there visiting his girlfriend, and telling me about his college and what he's studying, and it was just a wonderful conversation that I had with him. So when I was done, I went back to my hostel, and I found a computer that was available. I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down. I haven't been in contact with Steve for a couple of days. So I'm going to send him an email. So I sit down. I try to log on. And nothing. It would time out. So I'd try again. It would time out again. By this time, it's 8 o'clock, and I'm at my end. And I'm almost in tears when I hear my name, Michelle. And I turn around, and here's Jim Jones. Oh. Jim, Jim, I'm so glad to see you. And so we talked a bit, and I felt much better after that. It was just a familiar face, and I had calmed down. So he went to find his bed, and I said to him, Jim, I just hated walking into Burgos. I couldn't find any arrows, nothing. And he said, oh, neither could we. I said, okay, if a group of men cannot find any arrows, then it wasn't just me. So, but when I arrived back home and I reflected on this incident, I realized that I had changed in those 9 days that I saw Jim. 1, I accepted Jim for who he was at the time. And 2, I had given up that notion that I can't walk this Camino by myself, that I do need help. And it is nice to have a familiar face once in a while. And how many times we might be having just a really tough day, and all of a sudden we get that phone call from someone, and it just helps us. Or we get something in the mail, or someone just smiles at us, and we just feel, okay, the day is okay, and I'm going to do all right. So that was a very good lesson for me to learn. So about 2 weeks later, I decided I was going to walk an 18-mile day so I could get to a city called Compostela. And on the map in the guidebook, I could tell that Compostela was a little bit larger town, and it had a number of hostels in it. So I thought, oh, okay, I have some choices, and it will have a grocery store, a nice grocery store. So I set off in the morning, and it was a beautiful day, and I was up in the mountains, and the sun was out, the birds were singing. I could see farmers down in their fields cutting their hay. There were cows out, and you could hear their bells tinkling, and it was just one of those days. Yeah, it was just beautiful. But about a mile from Compostela, I started to get tired, and thought, I just got to get to my hostel, and I just want to rest. So I arrived at the hostel that I had chosen, and I looked at the line in front of me. Thought, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get a bed in this one or not. So I'm standing in line, and I hear a familiar voice, and I turn. Here's Jim Jones. I'm like, oh, Jim, it's so good to see you. Oh, Michelle, I was so worried about you. Last time I saw you, you were in Burgos. I've been looking for you. And so that was very nice. It was very touching for me. So we checked in. I did get a bed. I was the second to the last one. And this is the hostel where I had the 3 gentlemen in the room with me. I didn't care at that point in time. I really didn't. But when Jim and I were in line, we had made plans to have supper that evening. So he asked me, "What are you hungry for?" And I said, "Oh, Jim, I just want some pasta tonight." So later on when we met up, he said, "Michelle, I found a restaurant already that serves pasta." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Jim, how nice of you." So we had supper, and we conversed more, and I learned more about him. And he has a very interesting background, actually. As a child, he spent time in Africa with his family. His parents were missionaries. And so he had that experience, and he attended some services while in Africa as a child, some African services. And when he got back to the States and was a little older, he tried Baptist and Catholicism and Protestant. And so he just had this whole gamut of faith that he had tried. And at one point, he did tell me that he thought about becoming a priest, but because of his name, Jim Jones, he didn't think that was a good idea. So we had supper, and we parted ways then again. Oh, I'm sorry, I got to check my slides. Okay, I'm good. Gratitude. This is something I worked on every day when I was walking. Walking the Camino was a real gift for me, and every day I was grateful that I could be there. It truly was a gift, just the whole experience. And I was also very grateful for the people who took the time to paint the yellow arrows, no matter where they were. I was just grateful for that, and who took care of the route and made sure that the arrows were there and the scallop shells as well. So it truly was a gift for me. And I'm just going to show some slides, some pictures that I had taken. This is the cathedral in Leon, and it's a very large cathedral. And this is the front of it with the rose window. And here's a closer view of it. And a lot of the cathedrals do have rose windows, and they're just beautiful, especially when you're inside and looking up at them, or the sun is coming through at the right time. You get the colors on the floor. It was just wonderful to see that. And this is up in the mountains. One day, I thought it was so cool. I was above the power lines. I was so high. But over that ridge is a town, and that's where I started from. And I walked up. It just kept going up and up and up, and the view was just magnificent. This is one of the streets in Sarria, and in the villages and the cities, you just had cafes all along the streets, and they had places to sit outside, and there were always people out visiting with each other. So it was really nice. And I forgot to mention earlier with the map of the route, you can start anywhere on the route that you would like to, but you have to walk at least the last 60 miles in order to earn your pilgrim certificate. And Sarria is the point that gives you that 60 miles. So from Sarria on, the route gets full, because that's where most people start then, especially families with children. And yes, there were children. Like, oh my gosh. But they probably had more energy than the older ones did. And this is just another view. The road that you see kind of winding down, that's the road that you take down to this village called Hornios. And I stayed in Hornios that evening, and I was by myself. And I was at supper time, seated at a table, and there was another couple at another table from Australia, and they invited me to their table that evening for supper. So it was a really nice of them, and I just got to learn a lot about them and them about me. And that was just how the Camino was. You just invited people. You just talked with people. This is the cathedral in Burgos, and it was right across the street from the hostel that I stayed at. And this picture doesn't do it justice. It's huge. It's the largest cathedral in Spain, I believe. But the spires were just something to see. They just seem to keep going up and up and up. So it's a very beautiful church. These are bicyclists. The bicyclists also use parts of the route. A lot of times they use the road system is marked for them, but they do use the pilgrim route too. And there was just this uneasy acceptance or tolerance, I should say, between the walkers and the bikers. They normally did not have bells on their bikes, so they did not warn you that they were coming up from behind you. Some of them would at least holler and let you know they were coming, but a lot of times they would just zoom right around you. So you had to be aware of them coming behind you. But again, sometimes we just have certain people in our lives that we have to tolerate, and that's just part of the experience as well. The people who are walking the Camino are really like a community. You really are. Everyone is going in the same direction. You all look kind of grungy. We all look kind of grungy by the end of the day. But there's this code of respect, this unspoken code of respect among the pilgrims. You just accepted each other for who you are. There was no competition. I didn't feel between the pilgrims to get to the next village or to see how far you could walk. There wasn't that sense of that competitiveness, and I didn't get that sense of judgment among the pilgrims either. And nothing really mattered. Your politics, your faith, what you were wearing for the day, it just didn't matter. None of that mattered among the pilgrims. And you had time to visit with each other, especially in the afternoon when you were done walking. I met so many people that way and learned so much about different countries. You just had that time, and it was just a really nice time. I remember one evening at one of the hostels, I was in bed, but all of a sudden I heard this singing from outside. And I was laying there listening to it. And the next day I learned that it was two gentlemen from Croatia, and they were singing songs from their homeland. Like, oh, wow, how cool is that? It was just so neat to hear that and to experience it. This is Todd and Zelda. As I said before, Todd is the gentleman that I walked with periodically, and Zelda also would walk with us, so we kind of became a threesome. And Todd is just a wonderful example of perseverance. Earlier, he did start in Saint Jean Pied de Port, and early in his walk, he developed a blister on his heel, and that blister ate into his heel, and became infected. So he had to stop walking for 3 days. And this is one of the exceptions where a hostel will let you stay longer if you are having some health problems. So he had to stop walking for 3 days in order for the antibiotics to take effect and just give his heel some time to rest. And also, just these little things just seemed to happen to Todd. But he just kept going, and he persevered, and he actually could not get his walking boot on his foot, so he had to walk in his tivas for the whole way. And those tivas held up. So if you're looking for a good pair of sandals for the summer, I'd recommend Tevas because they really lasted him. And then Zelda also, she started having knee problems early in the walk too, but she kept going. The three of us, some mornings we'd start out together, and then Zelda would kind of fall behind because she was a little slower because of her knee. So Todd and I would keep going, and so about 4 o'clock, here would come Zelda. Like, oh my gosh, Zelda, you're here, you made it. And this one day, we thought for sure Zelda would stop in the village. Sometimes we'd make arrangements, okay, we're going to stop here, Zelda, this is where we'll be at. So one day we thought Zelda for sure would stop in the village before that one. But sure enough, 4 o'clock, here comes Zelda. Like, oh my gosh, Zelda. So she made it. So she was another good example of perseverance for me. This is Marion and Emily, and they're just like the most wonderful young women I ever met. They are from Denmark, and I met them, I believe I had 4 days left of my walk. So I met them in a village called Portomarin. And when I arrived at the hostel, they were outside in the garden area sunning themselves. Like, oh my gosh. And they hadn't looked like they walked a day at all. Like, oh gosh, you look so fresh. And they really did. And they talked Danish, and they talked very fast, and they talked a lot. They were just enjoyable. So the next day, as we started out, I started with them, and I was able to converse with them and learn more about them. And it happens to be that they started in the city before Pamplona. So they had been walking longer than me, but they had taken a couple of days of rest because they were tired and they just felt that they needed that time. But I learned a lot about Denmark. I learned that in 2nd grade, their textbooks are in English, so they have to learn English because not a lot of people speak Danish, so they are required to learn English. And they're paid to go to college. Like, wow, how cool is that? But they were just very, very funny and just very, very nice young women. And my family had a chance to meet them in Santiago, actually, so that was kind of neat that I could share that with Steve and the boys. These are 2 people that I have met. This is me and Todd. My 2nd week of walking was very cold. You could see your breath in the morning. So when I would tell people that I was going in June and July, they'd say, oh, it's going to be so hot. So like my 2nd week, like, this isn't hot. This is really cold. So this morning, my hands were freezing. So I put my extra pair of socks on my hands just to keep them warm. And that's what you did along the Camino. You improvised a lot because you didn't have a whole lot with you. So you used what you had, and you did okay, and you were all right. So Todd thought this was pretty funny. And this is the Iron Cross. And the Iron Cross is at the highest point of the Camino. It's about as high as Denver. And the tradition is that you bring a rock from your homeland, and that rock represents something that you want to leave behind. And so when I was at the Iron Cross and I was walking around it, I could see pictures of loved ones that people had left behind. There were ribbons, there were beat up shoes, just about anything and everything. But as I walked around it, I could feel the pain that the people had left behind. So it was a very moving experience for me that day. And this is more towards the end of the walk. And this is the cathedral, the St. James Cathedral. And I'm not sure if you can pick them out, but right in the middle, way up on top, that is St. James, the pilgrim. And every day at 11 o'clock, they have a pilgrim's mass. And I arrived on a Sunday, and I was in time to attend the 11 o'clock mass, but I decided that I was going to do it Monday, the next day. I wanted to rest up, and I wanted to be able to take in the experience of the mass. So on Monday I went to mass, and I'm sitting there on the wooden benches, wooden benches and the wooden kneelers. And I'm just looking around me and looking at all of the pilgrims who are there and all of the tourists. And I was just overwhelmed with the thought of being there. And I finally made it. And I finally fulfilled one of my dreams. And inside the cathedral, you have your main aisle. And then you have two sections that branch off to the left and to the right that also have pews in them too. And at the end of the Mass, they have a very large, what's the word I'm looking for, Steve? The incense, thank you, the incense burner. And it's huge. It takes about 6 to 7 men to swing it back and forth. And so what they do at the end of the Mass is they take this incense burner and they swing it back and forth between those alcoves. And it was just a very moving experience to see it. And the tradition with that is that in the olden days, when the pilgrims would come to Mass, they would use the incense burner in order to eliminate the odor from all of the pilgrims. Because they didn't have the hostel systems back then. You just walked, you had what you wore. That was it for many of the pilgrims. So it's come a long ways with the hostels, but they still do the traditional incense. And when I arrived home, I did have a hard time adjusting back. I'll have to admit that. The noise and the responsibilities, and I would have to get in a car and go someplace. I'm like, really? I have to get in a car? I can't just walk? So it was a hard transition coming back, and I kept asking myself, how do I keep that spirit of the Camino alive? And I'm not quite sure that I have figured that out yet. I don't know if I made that complete bridge, and I'm not sure that I ever will. I think the Camino will always stay with you. It was just a very incredible experience for me. And to follow up with Jim Jones, this is Jim here. On the day that I arrived, or when you arrive in Santiago, the church is located in the old city. You have the old city, and then you have the new city around it. So when you come into the old city, you walk in behind the cathedral, actually, and then there's a tunnel right next to the church that you walk down, and then you emerge out onto the plaza. Well, when I emerge out onto the plaza, who is standing there? Jim Jones. My gosh, Jim, how are you? And so we gave each other, he was just standing there watching pilgrims come in. He had been there a couple of days already. So we gave each other a big hug and kind of caught up with each other and said, oh, wait, Jim, I have to look at the cathedral. So I turned around and I look at the cathedral, and it just awed me, that I was there, and the largeness of it, and just the beauty of it. It was just wonderful to see. So Jim helped me find the pilgrim's office, and I picked up my pilgrim certificate, and I have it up here if you would like to see it afterwards. So we decided to have some lunch together, and this is where Jim told me his story and what he had been I'm carrying with him along the Camino. And I don't want to divulge it because I don't have his permission to do so. But it was just a good reminder for me that you don't know what people are carrying with them and what they are struggling with. So we had lunch. I paid for his lunch, which he didn't want. It was hard for him to accept that, I guess I should say, but I did anyway. So, and I said, "But Jim, you can buy me ice cream later." So we agreed to that, and we high-fived, and I haven't seen him since. He's from Virginia, and so I tried Googling his name, but there are tons of Jim Jones in Virginia. And Jim just isn't the type. I've checked Facebook, but he isn't on Facebook either. So maybe someday our paths will cross again in some way, because he still owes me ice cream yet. And this is me on the day that I arrived. Jim took this picture for me. And when my mother-in-law saw it, she said, "Oh, she looks so good." Like, well, I'm not sure what she expected, but okay. And we also have a funny story in our family, too. As most of you know, Steve and the boys met me in Santiago then when I was done. I arrived on a Sunday, and they arrived on Tuesday then. And I knew they would be there in the afternoon. So I planted myself outside the hotel on a bench, and I just sat there and I waited for them. And I saw this white car drive up with 4 heads in it. Oh, they're here. I was so excited to see them. And the boys get out of the car and they're looking for me, and they didn't recognize me. My hair had bleached out so much, so they did not recognize me at all at first. But it was a very wonderful reunion. It was a really neat time. This is our front door. When we arrived home, I found these scallop shells on either side of the front door. And I have not been able to find the person who put them there for me, but it was like the Camino met me when I came home. And if I learn of someone who is going to travel the Camino, these will be passed on to them, because it was just a really wonderful thing to have. And this is a stop sign that's actually on the route as well, and someone had spray painted it, "Don't stop walking." And this is my hope for you as you begin Lent, that you don't stop walking and that you don't stop growing, and that you learn to trust yourself and you learn to believe in yourself. And I'd like to close with part of a pilgrim prayer that was given out at a pilgrim mass. Be for us a companion on our journey, the guide on our intersection, the strengthening during fatigue, the fortress in danger, the resource on our itinerary, the shadows in our heat, the light in our darkness, the consolation in our dejection, and the power of our intention.